The little boy had absolutely nothing to his name, living in a world that seemed to have forgotten him. Yet he had no idea that giving away his very last meal to a fragile stranger would rewrite the stars of his destiny forever. Welcome, my dears, to a cozy corner of the world. Come, pull your chair a little closer to the fire. Listen to the crackle of the logs. Tonight's tale is one of the most beautiful I know. But before we begin our journey into the snowy streets of Oakhaven, if you enjoy stories that warm the heart and leave you with a valuable lesson, subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales and become part of our storytelling family. And tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I love reading every comment. Let us travel back to a winter so harsh, they say the rivers froze in mid-flow and the trees shivered until their branches cracked. In the heart of the secluded valley lay the village of Oakhaven. It was a picturesque place, with steep thatched roofs and cobblestone paths, but beneath its charming exterior lay a community gripped by the merciless cold and the heavy hand of poverty. In this village lived a 10-year-old boy named Elias. Elias was small for his age, with a mop of unruly brown hair and eyes the color of summer leaves, a stark contrast to the endless white snow that surrounded his home. He lived in a tiny, drafty cottage at the very edge of the village, a place where the wind howled through the cracks in the wooden walls like a chorus of lonely ghosts. Elias lived with his mother, Clara. Clara had once been the most vibrant woman in Oakhaven, known for her melodious singing voice and her unmatched skill at the loom. But the dampness of the cottage and the scarcity of food had taken their toll. For the past 3 months, she had been bedridden with a terrible fever, her once rosy cheeks now pale as the snow outside. Elias loved his mother more than anything in the world. Every morning, he would wake before the sun, wrap himself in his thin, patched coat, and venture into the freezing village to find whatever work he could. He would chop wood for the blacksmith, sweep the steps of the apothecary, or carry heavy sacks of grain for the miller. But in a winter this severe, no one had much coin to spare, let alone for a small boy. On the day our story truly begins, the sky was a heavy, bruising gray. Elias had spent the entire morning shoveling snow from the grand driveway of Silas Thorne, the wealthiest and most heartless merchant in Oakhaven. Mr. Thorne was a large, imposing man who wore coats lined with red fox fur and carried a heavy silver pocket watch that he checked constantly, as if time itself owed him a debt. When Elias finished clearing the snow, his hands were blistered and blue with cold. He waited by the grand oak doors, shivering, hoping for a fair wage. Mr. Thorne opened the door just a crack, letting out a blast of warm, rose-scented air that made Elias's stomach rumble violently. "You missed a spot near the stables, boy," Mr. Thorne grumbled, his voice like grinding stones. Without another word, he tossed a single, tarnished copper coin into the snow and slammed the door. Elias dropped to his knees, frantically digging through the icy powder until his numb fingers brushed against the cold metal. 1 copper coin. It was barely enough to buy a stale loaf of bread. But to Elias, it was a treasure. It was survival. He clutched the coin tightly in his fist, holding it close to his chest as he trudged toward the village square. The wind whipped at his face, stinging his cheeks and making his eyes water. As he approached the center of town, the heavenly aroma of freshly baked bread washed over him. It came from Baker Thomas's shop, a warm, inviting place with windows glowing like golden beacons in the gloom. Elias pressed his face against the frosty glass, marveling at the sight inside. There were plump loaves of sourdough, golden braided brioche, and sweet buns dusted with powdered sugar. His stomach cramped with a painful emptiness. He hadn't eaten anything but thin cabbage broth for 2 days, saving the few scraps of food they had for his mother. The bell above the door jingled as Elias stepped inside. The sudden warmth of the bakery made him dizzy. Baker Thomas, a round, flour-dusted man with a kind but tired face, looked over the counter. "Ah, Elias, a harsh day to be out, my boy. How is your mother?" he asked, wiping his doughy hands on his apron. "She is resting, Mr. Thomas," Elias replied softly, stepping up to the counter and carefully placing his single copper coin on the polished wood. "Please, sir, what can I get for this?" Baker Thomas looked at the lonely coin, then at the boy's hollow cheeks. He sighed, a heavy, sorrowful sound. Times were hard for everyone, and the baker's own shelves were not as full as they used to be. He reached under the counter and brought out a small, slightly misshapen loaf of dark rye bread. It was from yesterday's batch, hard and dense, but it was food. "Here you go, Elias. Take this. Soak it in a little hot water, and it will make a fine meal for you and Clara."
"Thank you, sir,"
Elias beamed, taking the bread as if it were made of solid gold. He tucked it carefully inside his coat, close to his heart to keep it from freezing. As he stepped back out into the biting wind, his mind raced with joyful thoughts. He would boil some water, soften the bread, and maybe, just maybe, his mother would find the strength to smile today. He hurried down the narrow, winding cobblestone streets, keeping his head down against the blowing snow. But as he turned the corner into the dark, narrow alleyway known as Cobbler's Lane, he stopped dead in his tracks. Huddled against the stone wall, partially covered by a thin layer of snow, was an old woman. She looked incredibly frail, her body wrapped in a tattered, threadbare shawl that offered absolutely no protection against the winter's fury. Her face was lined with deep wrinkles, telling a story of many difficult years, but it was her eyes that caught Elias's attention. They were a striking, piercing silver, shimmering with a strange, quiet dignity, despite her desperate situation. Elias hesitated. The cold was settling into his bones, and he needed to get home to his mother. He took a step forward, intending to pass by, but as he did, the old woman let out a weak, rattling cough that echoed in the quiet alley. It was the exact same sound his mother made when the fever was at its worst. Elias froze. His heart, already heavy with his own burdens, ached at the sight of her. He slowly approached the huddled figure. "Excuse me, ma'am," he whispered, his voice trembling slightly. "Are you all right?" The old woman slowly raised her head, her silver eyes meeting his. Her lips were cracked and blue. "I am so very cold, little one," she breathed, her voice barely louder than the whispering wind. "And I have not eaten in 3 days. The cold has stolen my strength, and I fear the winter will claim me before the sun sets." Elias felt a knot tighten in his throat. He reached into his coat and felt the hard, reassuring shape of the rye bread. It was his only food. It was his mother's only hope for a meal today. If he gave it away, they would both go hungry again. The thought terrified him. The hunger in his own belly was like a sharp knife, twisting and turning. But as he looked at the old woman, he didn't see a stranger. He saw his mother. He saw humanity suffering in the shadows, ignored by the wealthy villagers who hurried past in their warm furs. Without another thought, Elias pulled the loaf of bread from his coat. He knelt in the snow beside the old woman and took her trembling, icy hands in his. "Here," he said gently, placing the bread into her palms. "It isn't much, and it's a bit hard, but it will give you strength." The old woman looked at the bread, then up at Elias, her silver eyes widening in pure astonishment. "But, child," she whispered, "this is your food. I can see the hunger in your own eyes. You are frail yourself. Why would you give your last meal to a forgotten old woman?" Elias offered a small, sincere smile. "My mother always tells me that a kindness given in the dark shines brighter than the sun. You need it more than I do right now. Please, eat." If you're enjoying this story so far, please take a moment to like the video. It helps these stories reach more people who need a little inspiration today. Now, let us return to that freezing alleyway. The old woman slowly broke the bread, but instead of devouring it, as Elias expected a starving person would, she carefully broke it into 2 perfectly equal pieces. She handed one half back to Elias. "A meal shared is a burden lifted," she said softly, her voice suddenly sounding much stronger, much more resonant than before. "Eat with me, Elias." Elias was stunned. He hadn't told her his name, but the gnawing hunger in his belly overcame his curiosity. He sat down in the snow beside her, and together, in the bitter cold of that dark alley, they ate the hard rye bread. To Elias, it tasted better than any royal feast. As they ate, the old woman looked up at the gray sky, as if watching something only she could see. "You have a brave heart, Elias of Oakhaven," she murmured, brushing a snowflake from her tattered shawl. "Do you know the legend of the Winter King?" Elias shook his head, chewing the last morsel of his bread. "Long ago," the old woman began, her voice taking on a melodic, mesmerizing quality that seemed to push the cold away. "The Winter King ruled the world. He lived in a fortress of solid ice and hoarded all the warmth, all the fire, and all the light in his great hall. He believed that if he shared his warmth, he would be left cold. So he kept it all, and the world outside froze. The rivers stopped singing, the flowers died in their sleep, and the people wept. The Winter King was warm, but he was entirely alone, and his heart turned to frost." Elias listened, completely captivated. He forgot the biting wind. He forgot his frozen toes. He was completely transported by her words. "Then, one day," she continued, "a tiny, fragile sparrow flew to the highest window of the ice fortress. The sparrow had a single bright red summer berry in its beak. It was the last berry in the world. The sparrow was freezing, yet it tapped on the glass. When the Winter King opened the window, expecting the bird to beg for warmth, the sparrow instead dropped the sweet berry into the king's palm, gave a joyful chirp, and flew away into the snow. The king was so moved by the creature giving away its only treasure that a single tear fell from his eye. That tear melted the fortress of ice, releasing all the warmth and light back into the world." The old woman turned her silver eyes back to Elias. "The Winter King learned that warmth is not something you hoard to survive. Warmth is something you create by giving it away. You, my child, are the sparrow, and this village has a heart of ice." Suddenly, the magical moment was shattered by a loud, angry voice. "What is the meaning of this?" Elias jumped. Looming over them, looking furious and massive in his red fox fur coat, was Silas Thorne. The wealthy merchant glared at the old woman with absolute disgust. "I told you to leave this village yesterday, you wretched beggar. You are a blight on our streets. And you, boy," he sneered, turning his dark gaze to Elias, "idling in the alley when you should be begging for work. Pathetic." Mr. Thorne raised his walking stick, pointing it threateningly at the old woman. "Get up and get out of Oakhaven, or I will have the constable throw you in the freezing dungeon." Elias felt a surge of fear. Mr. Thorne was the most powerful man in town. A single word from him could mean eviction for Elias and his mother. But as he looked at the frail old woman, the fear in his chest was suddenly replaced by a fierce, burning courage. He stood up, placing his small body directly between the heavy walking stick and the old woman. "Leave her alone!" Elias shouted, his voice ringing clearly against the stone walls. "She hasn't hurt anyone. She's just cold and hungry. If you have so much warmth in your grand house, why can't you spare a little for someone who has nothing?" Mr. Thorne's face turned a dangerous shade of purple. No one, absolutely no one, ever spoke to him that way, especially not a penniless child. "You insolent little rat," he hissed, stepping closer. "You and your sickly mother will be out on the streets by morning. I'll make sure of it." He lowered his stick, gave a contemptuous snort, and stormed away, his heavy boots crunching angrily in the snow. Elias stood trembling. He had just sealed their fate. Where would he and his mother go? They would surely freeze to death. Tears of panic pricked his eyes, but he quickly wiped them away. He turned back to the old woman, forcing a brave smile. "Don't worry," he said. "I won't let him hurt you." The old woman stood up. To Elias's amazement, she no longer looked frail. She stood tall, and her silver eyes seemed to glow with an inner light. She reached out and gently touched Elias's cheek. Her hand, which had been like ice moments before, was now incredibly, wonderfully warm. "Do not fear the winter, little sparrow," she whispered softly, "for spring always follows the darkest cold." She reached into the folds of her tattered cloak and pulled out a small, smooth, dark wooden box, no larger than an apple. It was intricately carved with winding vines and tiny soaring sparrows. She pressed it into Elias's hands. "Take this. Do not open it until the midnight bell tolls. And remember, true wealth is never kept in a vault. It is kept in the heart." Before Elias could ask what she meant, a sudden blinding gust of snow blew through the alley. Elias squeezed his eyes shut and shielded his face. When the wind died down a moment later, he opened his eyes. The old woman was gone. There were no footprints in the snow where she had been standing. There was only the empty alley, the quiet wind, and the small wooden box in his hands. Elias rushed home, his mind a whirlwind of confusion and wonder. When he pushed open the door to his drafty cottage, his heart sank. His mother's condition had worsened terribly in his absence. She was shivering violently, her breathing shallow and ragged. The single candle beside her bed was flickering, fighting a losing battle against the encroaching darkness. "Mother," Elias cried, running to her side. He wrapped his own thin coat over her blankets, rubbing her freezing hands. "Mother, I'm here. I brought a little bread." He fed her the remaining pieces of the rye bread, soaked in a little hot water. but she barely swallowed it. The terrifying reality set in. They had no money, no food, and Mr. Thorne was going to throw them out in the morning. Elias sat by her bed in the freezing dark, clutching the small wooden box the old woman had given him. He felt utterly hopeless. The world was so big, and he was so very small. He watched the shadows dance on the wall, waiting. He listened to the whistling wind outside, waiting. And then, finally, the heavy, mournful gong of the village clock tower began to strike. 1, 2, 3. Elias counted the chimes, his heart pounding in his chest. 11, 12, midnight. With trembling fingers, Elias found the small brass latch on the wooden box. He pressed it, and the lid sprang open. Elias gasped. There was no gold inside. There were no precious jewels or coins to pay their rent. Nestled in a bed of deep red velvet lay a single, radiant, glowing seed. It pulsed with a warm golden light, casting a beautiful, soft glow that illuminated the entire gloomy cottage. As Elias watched in absolute awe, the seed began to float gently upward. It hovered in the center of the room, spinning slowly. Suddenly, a wave of pure summer warmth washed over the cottage. The frost on the windows instantly melted away. The damp, freezing air was replaced by the sweet, fragrant scent of blooming jasmine and sun-warmed earth. The golden light bathed his mother's face. Elias watched, tears streaming down his face, as the color miraculously returned to his mother's cheeks. Her shallow, ragged breathing deepened and slowed into a peaceful, healthy rhythm. Her shivering stopped completely. She opened her eyes, clear and bright, and looked at Elias with a strength he hadn't seen in months. "Elias?" she whispered, sitting up without any effort. What is this beautiful light? I feel completely well. I feel warm." Elias threw his arms around her neck, sobbing with relief and joy. The little sparrow had brought the summer to their home. But the magic did not stop there. The golden light from the seed expanded, pushing outward through the walls of the cottage. It swept through the snowy streets of Oakhaven. Wherever the light touched, the oppressive, biting cold vanished. The thick ice on the river cracked and began to flow with a joyful babble. The snowmen in the village square melted into puddles of clear water, and tiny green shoots of spring grass began to push through the thawing earth. The villagers awoke, stepping out of their homes in utter disbelief. They had gone to sleep in a frozen nightmare, and they were waking up to the gentle, balmy breeze of early spring. But the greatest shock of all was yet to come. As the sun rose, casting a golden hue over the transformed valley, a magnificent carriage drawn by 4 snow-white horses rolled into the village square. The carriage was adorned with gold leaf and bore the royal crest of the neighboring kingdom, a crest featuring a soaring sparrow. The villagers gathered around, whispering in awe. The heavy carriage door opened, and out stepped a woman. She was dressed in an elegant gown of midnight blue silk, draped in a heavy, luxurious velvet cloak. Her silver hair was pinned up perfectly, adorned with diamonds that sparkled like morning dew. It was the old woman from the alley. The villagers bowed their heads. Silas Thorne, the wealthy merchant, pushed his way to the front of the crowd. When he saw her face, his knees buckled, and he collapsed onto the damp cobblestones. "Queen Alara!" he gasped, his face draining of all color. The queen looked down at the trembling merchant. Her silver eyes were sharp and unforgiving. "Stand up, Silas Thorne," she commanded, her voice ringing with royal authority. "For years I have heard whispers of a village in my kingdom where the rich feast while the poor starve in the shadows. I came disguised as a beggar to see the truth of these rumors with my own eyes. And I found a village with a heart of ice. You, Mr. Thorne, threatened to throw a dying woman and her child into the snow. You hoard your warmth like a dragon hoards gold." She turned away from the cowering merchant and scanned the crowd until her eyes landed on a small boy with unruly brown hair, holding the hand of his healthy, smiling mother. The queen's stern face softened into a radiantly beautiful smile. She walked through the crowd, which parted respectfully to let her through. She stopped in front of Elias and knelt down so they were eye to eye. "But even in the deepest, darkest winter," Queen Alara said softly, her voice carrying across the silent square, "I found one brave little sparrow, a boy who had nothing, yet gave away his everything to save a stranger." She stood up and addressed the village. "From this day forward, Elias and his mother shall live in the royal estate. And as for Oakhaven, Mr. Thorne will distribute his hoarded wealth to rebuild every drafty home and fill every empty pantry. Let this be a reminder to you all. A kingdom is not measured by the gold in its vaults, but by the kindness in the hearts of its people." And so, Elias's life was forever changed. He grew up in the beautiful palace, receiving the finest education and never knowing the pain of hunger again. But no matter how wealthy or powerful he became, he never forgot the cold alleyway, the taste of hard rye bread, or the lesson of the Winter King. He grew to be a wise and gentle leader, always ensuring that in his kingdom no one was left in the cold and no one was forgotten in the dark. You see, my dear friends, life will sometimes place us in the bitter cold. It will test our hearts and challenge our spirits. It is easy to be kind when our bellies are full and our homes are warm. But true character, the kind of character that changes the world, is revealed when we are willing to share the little we have with someone who has even less. When we stop hoarding our warmth and start giving it away, we realize that we have the power to melt the coldest of hearts and bring spring to the darkest of winters. And that, my dear friends, is why a kind heart is worth more than all the gold in the world. If this story touched your heart, don't forget to subscribe to Nanny Granny's Golden Tales for more timeless tales and endless wisdom. And tell me in the comments, what lesson did you learn from today's story?